Good morning and welcome to session 4 of the 2021 SLL LightBytes online series. My name is Bob Bohannon. I am the current SLL president and I will be chairing today's session. Before introducing today's speakers, I'd just like to run you through some housekeeping notes to make certain that this event runs smoothly and productively for you. If you're experiencing any difficulty in hearing or seeing today's webinar, we recommend that you leave the session and log back in. Other browsers exist, but we have found that using Google Chrome as your browser tends to run the session reliably. At the end of today's presentations, there will be an interactive Q&A session. So we encourage you to post questions using the chat function at any point. We will aim to answer as many questions as possible. And if there are any unanswered questions, we will share these with the speakers and aim to provide a response following today's event. Today's LightBytes will be recorded and the links to those recordings will be shared after the session. Now, if you would like any more information about the Society of Light and Lighting, please visit our website, www.sll.org.uk, or contact sll@cibse.org. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, we can introduce this final session in the 2021 series of LightBytes Online. My job as president of the SOL is to help the Society continue its amazing work to deliver safe, zero carbon, healthy, sustainable, comfortably lit and visually stimulating environments. The COVID lockdowns of last year and this year temporarily cut CO2 emissions, but they also triggered a huge economic contraction. Now, some governments are calling to harness their economic recovery plans to boost low carbon design and technology. They call this Build Back Better. But what will the requirement to deliver net zero carbons place energy efficiency above all other lighting criteria we think are important? I hope not. Thus, this LightBytes series is titled, You Can Have It All: Minimum Energy, Minimum Resource, and Maximum Comfort. This four-part series sets out to explore methods of addressing the unavoidable need to pursue a new approach to lighting, considering manufacturing, design, installation, maintenance, and waste. The Society is joined by expert speakers from its sponsors and partnership. Steve Shackleton, FSLL, Lighting Applications Manager at Fargo-Holt UK, Helen Looms, FSLL, Head of Trilux Academy, Trilux Group, and Tim Bowes, MSOL, Head of Lighting Application at Whitecroft Lighting. Now, for today's session, our expert speakers are joined by two really well-informed guests, Emilio Hernandez and Mark Riddler. Emilio is a lighting designer and chair of the Green Light Alliance, a new organization with a mission to move towards a more circular economy. Having studied product design at Nottingham Trent University, he subsequently began his career in lighting at Hilson Moran Partnership. Emilio then joined GIA Equation in 2010 and in 2014 joined Nolte, where he became a director, working on a broad mix of projects, including large-scale residential, commercial, public realm, master plans, retail, hospitality, and food and beverage projects. Last year, Emilio made the move to Sweden and co-founded Strom, providing an opportunity to partnerships to develop the sustainability values needed by the construction industry to evolve and grow. Mark Riddler has over 35 years experience and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. After designing over 100 shows, he became an associate at Morris Brill Lighting Design in 1998 and joined Building Design Partnership in 2003. Mark believes that collaboration is essential for great design and has recruited a vibrant team from varied backgrounds, including product designers, engineers, theatre designers, and architects, effectively forging them into a force in international lighting design. In his role as head of lighting for BDP, Mark made the decision that 2020 would be the year of the circular economy, for his design team. Following a period of research, discussions with stakeholders, they set about developing and changing their design process and specification to make some concrete contributions. So before we move to a roundtable discussion, we have a presentation from Mark and Amelia. And as with previous sessions, if you have any questions for our speakers based on today's presentations or earlier sessions, please post these using the chat function. So I'd like very much now to hand over to Mark and Amelia.
Thank you very much. Bob, can you see my screen? I'm going to assume we can.
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. So thanks for the introduction. This will be a bit of a two-part presentation. So I'll start with some introduction to how we're approaching some broader aspects of circular economy, and then Mark will look at some applications for this in terms of the the project applications that real-world instances of it. So we're here to talk about the circular economy. The Green Light Alliance, as Bob kindly introduced, is it's a platform really. Its key message isn't necessarily about light, but more to raise the profile of circular design within the industry. And it's important to highlight that whilst both Mark and I are light designers, that ultimately the success of this group is reliant on input from manufacturers, OEMs, control specialists, and architects, people up and down the food chain, because the dialogue has to happen more broadly than it currently is. I thought I would start with some takeaways from the previous sessions that we had. I thought they were really interesting, and these are my takeaways, and hopefully they'll create some food for discussion. But within the minimising energy and resource sessions, it seems that the focus is on miniaturisation to a degree, so as not to compete with comfort, to reduce the amount of resource, improve efficiency and efficacy of products, IoT and data harvesting to have better control and therefore use less energy, put light where we need it, when we need it, and the focus on reliability and how that's impacting the need for maintenance and remanufacture. I think arguably from what we saw, manufacturers are in a position now to claim that the main drive for replacement or maintenance of fixtures is actually now fashion trends changing rather than fixtures running out of useful life. And also perhaps arguably that when there's large leaps in the efficiency or efficacy of a product, then it warrants the replacement of either the LED source or the whole fixture within an installation before the end of its useful life. So there was discussion, or we touched on the modular light sources, and the takeaway for me in this was that it's not a universal solution to have modular LED boards or modular drivers necessarily for all products, and there's certain applications where it can be very useful, but others where perhaps the extra embodied energy needed for that to be achieved that doesn't get sort of realised throughout the life of the project. But perhaps speaking to Helen separately about this, it could be applied to other aspects of the luminaire, perhaps mounting methods or installation methods that we consider that might make removal, reinstallation of products more more easily achieved, and with making it a more robust method. It seems that material health, well-being, and sustainability are inextricably linked from all sustainability accreditations and conversations, whether it's WELL or UN SDGs or BREEAM. And we have to accept that when we're talking about the circular economy, that this is actually a bolt on to these things. We can't look at circular economy in isolation to well-being or sustainability or energy reduction. It just doesn't work, and that's part of the reason why it's such a tricky conversation. And speaking of complexity, we were sort of, the previous talks covered issues like logistics for reverse logistics for getting products out of buildings and not being disposed of but being moved to other sites. Remanufacture and redistribution, like the process is, I think again Helen mentioned that it's a non-uniform process, and production lines are set up in a way to make products but not necessarily to remanufacture them, and that's a big challenge to overcome as manufacturers. And there's also discussion on light as a service, and we'd like to perhaps elaborate on that with the idea of perhaps a dealership model rather than just the manufacturer having the sole responsibility, that perhaps there's partnerships and there's a value chain that way through looking at other industries. That's how longevity is achieved. So perhaps that's something we need to investigate further. Reduction, the terms waste and reduction of materials were used interchangeably really within the last few presentations, and we just need to be mindful of the difference of that. Reducing the amount of material going into a product is different to the product going into landfill at the end of its life, and then what we actually do to prevent that. So that's just something we need to make sure that we're it sort of comes into our lexicon a bit more. And end-of-life responsibility and innovation isn't something that's being addressed, and that's not necessarily a criticism of manufacturers. It's something that the whole community, design community, need to look at, and hopefully we can discuss that further later today. And then lastly, there's the bigger picture side of things. This has been a really great insight into the the experiences of the manufacturers involved in this setting up these LightBytes. But we, as part of the Green Light Alliance, we're talking to developers and architects, and we're trying to get their vision for what their net zero carbon or their circular futures are, and how that then is going to impact us as lighting designers and then manufacturers as a result. So to do it a bit more visually, I've just sort of put together an important urgent matrix where in the middle we have business as usual. It's been a tough year for everyone in the industry, or tough year and a bit, and we have to, we acknowledge that things that are really at the top of our list of important and urgent are reducing overall carbon emissions, and we're getting that message across the board from everyone. And as I just mentioned, ways that that's being addressed is improved efficiency and improved efficacy and control of products. And there's also, with companies like Ricolite and other producer compliance schemes, the reduction of waste and landfill, so trying to stop products ending up in the ground and keeping them at their useful levels. So those are broadly accepted, but at the other end of the matrix, things which largely get sort of left on the shelf for a while are basically manufacturers trying to find ways to sell fewer products or fewer new products. That's not a priority, and it's difficult to make that a realistic priority unless we replace that hole in the market with something else, some other renewed or remanufactured products. Things like asset tagging for urban mining. There's discussion about how we track the materials as well as the products which are in our buildings and being moved around, and with raw materials like copper being predicted to be out of the useful or efficient mining range in about 20 years' time. A lot of the copper we're going to use is going to be out in the market already within electric items, within products that we use, and we need to understand where those things are and how we can reclaim those materials. So that's going to have to come up the list at some point. On the left here, we have things which we know are important, but they've not yet become urgent. So the broader understanding of sustainable design, and that's something that the Green Light Alliance we're looking to help share and make it a bit more digestible for people. The lighting as a service and dealership model, again, I think there's acceptance that that's a route forward, but it's not become urgent yet. And reduced embodied carbon in the products. So we speak about the overall carbon emissions and reductions, but a lot of this is focused on in-use emissions. So 95% of the emissions of a product, or from a lighting product, or from its its in-use carbon. But embodied carbon, as we get more and more renewables online and renewable energy resources, will be a bigger piece of that picture, and that's something which will change over time. At the bottom right here, we have the urgent items, so but are not yet considered sufficiently important. So working at the reverse logistics, that has to happen now before we can actually implement any circular initiatives. Designing a second life into products, again, that has to happen in products now, so that when they reach the end of their life in 10 years' time that there's a way to remanufacture them and that's been considered. So it is quite important that we do this now. And then controls, data retrieval from products. This was mentioned, I think, by Steve, and it's about getting feedback from your information within the products. Once you retrieve them, you can see what type of life they had, how hard a life it was, and how many hours they've been run for, and then perhaps make a decision on what their resale value might be, or what they can go into next in terms of a project. So these are all things we need to investigate now, so that when they reach the end of their life in the future, we actually have something to framework to work in. And again, as I mentioned at the GLA, we're hoping to kind of raise the awareness of these things and get them a little bit closer to the top right corner of this diagram. So Tim, I won't spend too long in this diagram because Tim did finish on this last week, and he sort of explained the take, make, waste model. To talk about the circular economy, obviously we have to understand the linear one, and that's been covered already in this series. And then here we have the sort of well-known butterfly diagram from Ellen MacArthur, which has the biosphere and the technosphere, which we're going to focus on today. And within the technosphere, things that we do well already are maintaining and prolonging of products, and that's actually become, it's done very well back when we used traditional light sources, but with LED that's become a little bit harder in terms of the gap in between service cycles and the sort of techniques and tools needed to achieve it. And we do recycle very well, but this is a very broad term, and we'll touch on that again in a bit. It should also be like the end of the last resort, really, recycling. So we want to keep materials and products at this end of the useful chain as for as long as possible. Refurbishment and remanufacture, we do this to an extent, probably largely driven by heritage light fixtures, for example, and the way that the designers and manufacturers refurbish those and get them back out to market. So it's done more for that reason, but it is still in that category. And then reuse and redistribute is something which it needs a lot of work, and it goes back to the issue of the reverse logistics. Then one last thing is energy recovery, which is part of this diagram, and it's worth noticing really that a lot of plastics, for example, that go into the recycling process end up being incinerated for energy recovery, but they're still classified as having been recycled, and that's where this sort of broad term of the cleanliness and the sort of hygienic nature of recycling, it becomes a little bit more. We should challenge it a bit more, and there's a good reason why we should try and stop things reaching that end of the chain. So just to recap on that, it's the electronic waste, or WEEE, is the fastest growing waste stream, and currently only 3% of that is being recycled, which is concerning to say the least. And recycling itself, as we mentioned, it's a very broad term, and a move to circular model is a sort of feasible way to get out of this. As a sort of an example, government targets for recycling treatments are for 75% of material recovery, and of that only 55% to be recycled. So you end up with a lot of waste still through that process. And this complete change to the supply chain that we're talking about and investigating with people is complex, and it can be overwhelming. So we can't just deal with it by ourselves. And lots of different people we've seen it working on it, and we'll have a look at that in the next couple of slides. But it's going to need collaboration. We can't do it just in one sector at a time. So when we apply this to construction, and Mark will look at examples of this in his part of the presentation, at the moment, a lot of the opportunities for circular design exist in this sort of second half, if you like, of the REBA stages. So once the products have been produced, the maintain and upgrade, the possibility for reuse and remanufacture are all here, but greater collaboration between the supply chains needed. And the reason it isn't happening now could be partly that often products and projects are going to the lowest bidder based on price and not their environmental credentials. We're also lacking environmental detail in our specifications. So that means that the lowest bidder, when they're looking at value engineering processes, they don't have to necessarily play by the same rules as other more reputable manufacturers or suppliers that we specify. So there's an argument that we need a checklist or a specification, a component of our specification that deals with either circularity or sustainability in that way. So moving away from just having a linear start of it, how do we do that? The brief needs to change, and that involves discussion with architects and developers. And interestingly, Perkins & Will Architects, they've developed within their own policy a REBA Stage 8. And what that involves is them literally going into buildings before they do refurbishments or fit outs or projects, and assessing what components can be reused and remanufactured or retrieved, and then feeding that back into their brief. And that's a great innovation. And lighting is one of the last things into the building and the first things out. Could really be a key component within that, and we could lead the way or help lead the way through these discussions with them. So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail. This is a snapshot of what happens commonplace in the market today in terms of sustainability or sustainable design. We're familiar with LEED and BREEAM. They promote principles like waste avoidance and the reduction that we spoke about in the previous LightBytes. But these aren't focused on circular processes. They're still based on the linear economy. We've got Zaga here, which is a consortium, as a lot of people will be familiar with, and that avoids obsolescence and other circular principles through enabling upgradability of products using a common footprint of LED. And then we've got manufacturers and designers already on the market that are either focused on integrating F-market grade, integrating sustainable principles from the offset in their products, and they've always thought like that. They just haven't badged it as sustainability. And then companies like Skinflint, who remanufacture mid-century luminaires, and they've sort of, people have mentioned that there's a bit of a low-hanging fruit, but they're doing it, and they're doing it well. So it's a good example for us all. And then at the recycling end of this spectrum of the REBA stages, Ricoh, Light and Lumicon, two of the largest of 26 different compliance schemes in the UK. But they're focused on dealing with the end of life responsibility of the goal. But that's again, that should be the last resort. So what are the opportunities for increasing the synergy? Well, clients and developers are now starting to get much more on board, and architects as well, with sustainable schemes such as B Corp or the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and they promote circular principles. They also promote other sort of wellness principles, and it's important to they have different pillars within their schemes, but circularity are at the heart of their sustainable goals, and that's going to feed back into us as designers and into our briefs. We also have to consider research. Research is a really key part of this aspect, because the science will determine whether it's global warming potential or embodied carbon or in-use carbon, what's going to be the currency or the actual metric that we use to scientifically ratify that. And it was great to see the Trilux's research that they've done using scientific sort of ratification of their processes, and that's an ongoing discussion, and it needs to be shared, and we want to help raise the awareness of that as part of the GLA. And then we look at the checklist. As I mentioned, we need something in our specification that's going to help secure these sustainable principles in products and good practice that lots of manufacturers are working on. So there's we've written a GLA, we've written a couple of articles. There's one just been released with Light for Good, where we've sort of stress tested one of the products from Lucent that lighting, which helped to sort of demonstrate that that where these criteria are either successful or where perhaps they contradict each other. Cradle to Cradle is another one that Whitecroft had mentioned previously, and it's a really challenging, very, very product focused sustainable credit, and it's quite expensive to achieve, and it's a very involved process. So it's going to be hard to ask manufacturers to put their entire range through this system, but there's certainly principles between these two that can be learned. And then the SLL have developed their own circular economy assessment method, or CIAM, and we're hoping to get started with that. A couple of people at GLA have had some vision of that. I haven't, but I'd love to, as Bob well knows. And you know, that's going to deal with things like how and when to reuse existing products, how to develop or look for circular principles in new products, and how we lock this into our spec. And that's going to be really key. Also, something quite recently released is the Build Back Better Awards, which are you know, not focused solely on circularity, but they have a circular design principle, and that's interesting to see that they're motivating us as designers and manufacturers to include these credits, and that there's separate, you know, a separate kind of award category for this type of discussion. And then last in this section is Regenerate. Regenerate is a circular assessment method by Reading University, I think, and they, we can share a link to this afterwards, but they've developed a building-wide assessment method for the circular economy, and it's you know, it's open source, anyone can have a look at it. It's been developed with AECOM as well, and you know, I highly recommend just in exploring this and investigating it, because we need to broaden our horizon as designers and manufacturers. We can't just focus on engineering our way out of the problem in front of ourselves. And then to join the sort of the manufacturer side of things, there's lots of great initiatives. Stone Lighting with their Renew range, VF have created some environmental product declarations for a lot of their range, and that's again, you can download those off their website. But you know, until people start asking for these in projects or clients start demanding them, it's going to be difficult to justify pushing for these across the board. So again, it's a discussion with all the different manufacturers as to the best way to demonstrate this. So you know, all these things help us move on. And then lastly, we deal with the reverse logistics, and it was mentioned within one of the LightBytes as well that perhaps there's this you know, buyback scheme. Perhaps someone like Ricolite that already deal with the end of life of the products, or Lumicon, could sort of expand their operation to be part of that. And I think that's a really interesting conversation. You know, the material passports have also been discussed, and that would enable us to track you know, where products are and where they might become available. At the start of the brief for another project, you might know what's going to be on the horizon and what's coming out of another building. And that's particularly helpful with a large developer like British Land, for example, who can do, you know, they've got hundreds of buildings and they can schedule these things internally. So with all this in mind, I'd like to pass you over to Mark, who will now look at this from a sort of project perspective.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you, Amelia. I came from it very much. I was prompted to action by manufacturers, but quickly found that it wasn't only about manufacturing. And so I looked at this issue last year from a project life cycle point of view, and quickly discovered that actually wasn't something that I was going to be able to do on my own. Can everybody hear me okay? Because I've just lost the slides.
Okay.
Cool. Okay.
We can hear you, Mark, but we can't see your presentation anymore.
That's because Emilio's no longer the presenter. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, can see it now.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Very good. Right. Yeah, quickly became apparent that it wasn't actually completely down to the manufacturer or indeed the designer, that there were very many other players in this story. And it kind of, we all know how complex project teams are, but it essentially boiled down to 4 stakeholder groups. One is the client, one is the designer, one is the contractor, and one is the operator. And so I looked at it primarily from my designer's point of view, but then also what the interfaces were with the other stakeholders. So next slide, please. And consequently started with a presentation which I was using to engage with clients and FM and contractors to kind of test the waters to see, these are my thoughts, how does it accord with you? And so we'll take I'll take you quickly through the project cycle and some of the things that bear upon it, and you'll notice that some of them have got absolutely nothing to do with product. The first one is daylight, because this is where I start as a designer, and particularly in terms of refurbs as well as new builds, and that it's our starting point. And part of our circadian design response is to have layers of light. And one of the layers is typically very much in relationship to daylight. And this is a project snapshot that we were refurbing a 70s tower, which had brilliant daylight, and actually allowed us to remove 1/3 of the daylight scheme. And that's not only reduction in energy, but it's also a reduction in material, and therefore really plays to the avoid strategy of actually trying to stop specifying material in the first place. Next slide, please. And the daylight CBDM metrics really help in that, because it allows us now not to be dealing with things, abstract things like daylight factors, but actually to express daylight performance in terms of metrics that are much more familiar, and that allows us to meld and incorporate daylight and artificial lighting schemes in our design. So next slide, please. Or up one, please. This is the code intelligence, which is using the codes well to actually understand what they really are saying and design intelligently around them. So, for instance, in an office, the code may say we need 500 lux on the task. What it doesn't say is we need 500 lux splattered across the entire floor plate. Actually, what it says, if you're reading paper, you need 500. If you're doing VDU work, then you need 300. And then just outside of that, you need a lower light level, and outside of that, an even lower light level. And given the fact that in a typical workplace open plan situation, the desking is only 30% of the floor area, actually it means that we can save an enormous amount of energy and material as well by designing intelligently. Okay, next slide, please. And control, if the previous slide was deciding intelligently where to put the light, control is about when it is needed and using it only when it is needed. There's, in terms of the client, there's all sorts of advantages, not only in terms of the obvious ones in terms of energy, but also it provides a hell of a lot of information which they can find really useful. It can tell them all sorts of things about their situation, not only to do with lighting, things like optimized occupancy. It allows optimization, and if you're a big estate owner, it allows you to compare different buildings and drive best practice through your entire estate. And it can also provide data that really helps staff engagement, and that's important, or is increasingly important. Companies like PwC are finding that the sustainability performance of their buildings is actually key factor in successful recruitment and also retention of staff. Next slide, please. So the suppliers, we do specify product, and we do really rely on our manufacturing partners to come up with innovations. So this is a very small list, but and certainly with the work that we've been doing on with GLA, been really encouraged by the enthusiasm, innovation, energy of the manufacturers, and actually the level of engagement that they're having in a collaborative sense, which is only to be applauded, I think. There are some others listed on this slide, but they were just looking at not only their product, but also the material, the use of innovative materials or things like recycled plastics, the woods, cardboards, obviously all in a safe fashion, but also things like packaging and also things like where they source the materials, where they actually do manufacture. Next slide, please. And yes, packaging is, I mean, the ground zero on this is using recycled materials and ensure that it's recyclable. But there are other innovations as well, not only one product, one package, but grouping them together on a project basis actually provides all sorts of advantages for contractors because it ships site to points of installation rather than having to sort it, pre-sort it, and then deliver it. It's a problem, one less problem for them to solve. Also has strange knock-on site, it reduces theft from site, which was a surprising one I heard from our contractor partners. And next, LightBytes, yes, I noticed that we went through a period where there was a lot of manufacturing was offshored, and we're finding that quite a lot of people are repatriating manufacture as well as assembly into the UK and into Europe. And this is one of the things they're discovering is that because the communication lines are much shorter, that actually it's bringing benefits in marginal gains. So it's not always offshoring wasn't delivering perhaps the cost benefits that were anticipated. And we're finding that actually by repatriation, that you're getting better and faster iterative loops. And that also has benefits in terms of reducing transport costs and the carbon embedded in that process. Next slide, please. You can see that actually then choosing the specification of a product is using a lot of parameters that are not only to do with price, but also softer and less easily evaluated parameters, which means because we don't have a benchmarking scheme at the moment, if you go to the trouble as a designer and the manufacturers are going to the trouble of responsible manufacture, and we go to all of that effort to create a specification that is only then going to be destroyed as soon as it goes to a value engineering or an equal and approved process. We really need to engage our clients to buy into this at the briefing stage and to stick with the story all the way through. Now, they will only be able to do that if you give them the cost certainty that your specification is going to deliver. And remove the incentive for value engineering. And to do that, as designers, we've got to get involved much, much earlier in the costing of our designs so that it allows clients to hold the specification. Because you can do the best and most circular design in the world, and you can use the best and most sustainable products in the world. But if it doesn't get bought, if it doesn't get installed, if it doesn't, then it's worth nothing. It's not a circular product. And this is the kind of point I'm making. You only get circular projects, you don't get circular products. Products are only part of the gig. Next slide, please. And then there are design techniques that we can use, which again, the client needs to buy into and impose on the entire design team. We've been great advocates of removing lighting from the ceilings and making it task and floor-based, desk and floor-based for a while. And that's in the UK quite a controversial technique, but it does, from the circular point of view, mean that you can pack up the kit and put it in a box and use it elsewhere within your office or with your estate. Without going to the trouble of actually having to get an electrician in and removing it from the building fabric and then repairing that building fabric. So it's a really powerful, sustainable technique. Next slide, please. And also there's a trend for off-site manufacture of accommodation within a workspace environment. Obviously, if you're going to bring in pods and the light, you can integrate light with those pods. When you move those pods elsewhere to be used, the light travels with them. So it is an intrinsically sustainable way of doing it because the light is being reconfigured naturally without intervention for changing use. And continued adaptability of spaces is one of the key principles for circular design. Next slide, please. And then demountable design. This is becoming one of the other key principles of circular design, is actually making it disaggregated from the fabric of the building, because if you actually have to, if you embed it within the fabric, then it's much harder to actually remove it and to reuse it. And this is counter to kind of decades of my design experience, where we're always trying to embed light into the fabric, hide it, light without light fittings. But actually, we're now beginning to move to a slightly different design aesthetic, if the client and the design team are up for it, which is driving a different aesthetic, but actually it's not necessarily a bad aesthetic in my mind. And it's the projects where we've done it, it's introduced quite an interesting story aesthetically, which is pleasing. Next slide, please. And this is just a bit of a detailed exploration of one that we developed for a project where we had a custom H section extrusion, which was unpainted and unfinished with an uplight component and then a standard track within the H profile, into which were plugged a series of lighting tools, not only lights but also sensors, emergency lighting and the like. All run off a Bluetooth control system, so that the whole lighting infrastructure was entirely demountable, including the wiring, and it was only getting bulk electricity. It wasn't having to be fed with data wiring. So and what was interesting about this was that even though it was an entirely bespoke system, it was quite a big project, so the quantities could actually cost, the cost was, without the uplight, was less than the contractor was getting prices for standard track. So it doesn't always have to be expensive. There doesn't always have to be a cost uplift for doing this. And with the reduction of quantity of materials, if you can actually reduce that side of it, it can counter the slight uplift on product, which sometimes is necessary if you're going to get the good sustainable product. So next slide, please. And then design product, we're looking at disassembly, so that you've got usable components, and so that it can be disassembled at end of life, but also perhaps repurposed in the midst of life. Next slide, please. And Emilia touched on this. If we need to know what how long fixtures have been used for and in what conditions, and this Tecnato, for instance, already do this. But the reason you need this information is because it actually then gives you gives the product value. Next slide, please. Supply chain, if we've imposed all sorts of things in terms of packaging and what have you, then we need to make sure that contractors are doing it, and that has implications again for the client and project governance, because they need to set the projects up and the contracts so that they have the right to impose the design requirements upon the contractor. Next slide. And then one of the biggest challenges to sustainable projects is that there's a big disconnect between capital clients and OPEX clients, operational clients. And quite often the two never talk to each other within the same organization. And again, if a product is not recycled or is not reused and re-entered into the cycle at the end of use or whilst the building is being maintained, then it's not a circular product. And consequently, I feel as though we really need to engage with building operators much more than we do historically or habitually as designers, but just generally within the whole building environment. And I think there's advantages that will allow us to have continued relationships with our clients rather than just leaving the door at the end of REBA 7. And this for me, is what Rebra 8 and Wilden Perkins model is about. And there's also, the really key point is that operators need an inventory. To be able to recycle, reuse stuff, they need to know what stuff they have. And that, but lighting can really help in this way because they're essentially electronic products. They can tell you where they are and therefore how many you have, which should help in this story going forward. Next slide, please. And this is, yeah, a humorous slide, new second-hand car. But if you have a look at the window, there is a basic specification description. There is a service history, as in how long it's been used for, and that gives value. Without that information, that has no value. It's worth 50 quid for a scrap. And we need to start providing this kind of information for the equipment that we're specifying and making, because that will give it value when it may not have run out of service life, but it's come out at its end of project life. Next slide, please. And so this is returning to the end. Really, it's a realization that it's a story, and that we need to be open to new relationships, as do our clients. Clients are really key to this. That's why we're beginning to have conversations with them. They're very receptive. They weren't 5 years ago, they are now. So the mood is changing. And you can step into this story at any part. It doesn't have to be a brand new project. It can be existing relationships. It can be we can do it with projects that are in construction or in use, and we need to start that dialogue with our clients to make sure that it gets on the agenda. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways are circular economy is necessarily collaborative. Designers and manufacturers cannot do this on their own. There's a profound impact on project governance. We can't carry on doing the projects in the way that we have and the way the clients have if sustainability is going to be really delivered. It needs governance, therefore it needs the client to actually buy into this and to drive it through. And it requires innovation in the supply chain, partly because the standards are not available, although through the GLA we are beginning to try and help those. Next slide. There are key circular economy principles. These are the ones that BDP have produced. Other architects are available and have their own systems. But what's interesting is that this isn't a lighting circular economy principles. These are architectural circular economy principles, and we need to, as an industry, we need to understand the wider design conversation that's going on and tapping in and helping. One of the great things about lighting is, whilst it's a small fish in a very big ocean, it can be a leader in this and will actually help drive an understanding of wider lighting considerations like wellness, like circadian, like the potential impact of beneficial impact of lighting higher up the agenda. So there's real opportunity here as lighting professionals to help drive this conversation. Next slide, please. And so we join the full circle back to the GLA. Emilio, do you want to close?
Yeah, I mean, we've been very fortunate with the the positive feedback we've had, just asking people to subscribe. And we're arranging onboarding sessions now. It's a voluntary organisation. It's very informal. It's very open. And if there's anything that from Mark's aspect of the talk that you think would be of interest to you and you'd want to research, and we're looking to support, to promote, to provide connections within the industry to people so that you can help raise the profile of that. So
I just should chime in there as well, is that from Bob's introduction of me, that I thought that at the end of 2020 I was going to come up with a BDP circular economy process, and I found that wasn't what I achieved. But what was great was to join in this kind of alliance, because there's a BDP CE checklist, no value, have very little impact. But actually, if we join together and come up with a consensus, then that is where the power will come from, the power to actually change what we do for the benefit of generations to come.
Thanks.
Emilio, Mark, that was just brilliant. So if I could ask our other panelists to bring on their webcams and bring on their microphones. That was hugely interesting to both of you. Before I bring some of the questions from the audience in, any comments from our panelists from the previous three you'd like to give to Mark and Emilio?
Yes, I was very gratified to hear you sort of endorsing everything we've said and putting your layer on this, because we as manufacturers seem to think that lighting designers can help all this collaboration, but actually I think it's a much bigger job than we understand. And it's good to see you focusing on this collaboration with the end client, the contractor, the FMs. I think we do need to somehow develop this much wider discussion. And also, I think your last point, Mark, was great. If we can get them talking about circular economy, maybe we can also get them talking about lighting in general and raise the profile of lighting. So maybe this is a really golden opportunity for us.
Yes, an excellent presentation. Thank you, Emilio and Mark. I think it's a big job, this, isn't it? It's not just for lighting manufacturers or designers. It involves everybody. But I completely agree. I think lighting can lead this from the front. It's so visible. It's so obvious. And it seems so easy, in inverted commas, to sort of recycle light fittings and reuse light fittings and similar. But of course, it's not an easy task. But it's fantastic that we're all beginning to talk the same languages. And that's really encouraging, Mark, when you mentioned there that 5 years ago, clients, I don't know what the right words are, but probably not bothered isn't the right way to frame it, but the fact is they are now, and I think you know, in partnership we can make this work. So great, I learned a lot from that. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, I think we as designers, perhaps I was thinking a bit guilty of pushing the idea of payback for quite a few years now, when the idea of transferring from conventional source to LED. And clients have bought into that, and they've understood the process of it, but we've not expressed the value of materials and of, you know, the environment. We've not sold the value in that. So now, you know, that story needs to be revamped essentially to get to that stage, and they're listening, or they're pushing it in other aspects of furniture, or, you know, doors and other sort of other materials within the building. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say something similar, actually, Amelia. I think you know, the conversations are moving on from energy payback and how quickly can I get my return on my investment. They're looking at the bigger picture about what it means actually on a carbon point of view, both operational and embodied. And I think, yeah, no, thank you for the presentation, really interesting. I think the way we all agree, it needs the full chain, and that's not just us, that's our suppliers as well, right through to the end clients, through the end of life position, to enable everybody to buy into it and understand it and add their own value to it, because each part of us on our own can't do it. You know, we recognised quite early on, you have to get the clients to buy into it and adopt it and believe in it, and create the models to enable them to understand that. So 10, 15 years down the line, they know where that product can go to, what can be done with it, how they can manage it, to enable that to happen.
And I think it's just because it's complicated isn't an excuse for not doing anything. And there are very tangible things that we can do. The lighting checklist, I think, is a really key one, because it will demonstrate that if we get it right. that a consensus is possible, and that it's easily digestible, and that the industry generally can understand it. It will help that conversation with clients and other stakeholders, and it will also, I think, help with organisations like LEAD and BREEAM and WELL, which are very well established, and the clients get those. If they actually we can bolt into those established communication routes, it will really help set the agenda for us, set the platform for those conversations. And then the other things that the GLA are hoping to do in terms of research and education and will kind of follow on from those. I think the checklist is an achievable, tangible goal that we need to concentrate on.
So I have to comment there, because Mark, you've been inputting to the assessment method. Emilio has correctly made me feel intentionally guilty that for some reason he's missed out on being sent an early draft version. So we'll correct that.
But Bob, it means that you can trust my confidentiality. When I say I won't pass it on,
yeah, absolutely. I'm full marks and huge humble that Emilio still put our logo up on his slide. So thanks for that. But I know what I'm doing this afternoon now, Emilio. Mark, you said you needed an effective checklist. Do you think where we are on the assessment method, do you think that's effective?
Yeah, I think it shows really great promise. With the GLA they're half. We've got a series of articles in Mondo where we're looking as objectively as we can to the lighting is good check sheet, and the cradle to cradle system is the next one, and then we're going to be looking at CM. So I think once we've gone through those, we hope to be able to use kind of a guide coalescence of those, so that they're not contradictory. But yeah, no, I think the CM thing is really, it strikes something that it's usable. And the other thing that I think you set up right from the beginning, Bob, which is great, was let's not try and do perfection in 5 years. Let's do something that's very good now, and then hone it and iterate it and make it better. And I think it's achieving that.
Thank you very much. That's great. I've got a question for Tim, and this one's come in from Paul Robinson. And we'll break out to the any movement from the more mainstream lighting companies to take account of circular economy in their lighting design. So hopefully you're okay. Big call mainstream, Tim.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, can you just repeat the question again, Bob? Sorry, I think you did.
Well, any movement from the more mainstream lighting companies to pick up on circular economy. Now, I know in all my conversations over the last year, people have been really positively supportive of hearing that, say, Whitecroft are getting heavily involved in circular economy. So how's that been for you?
Yeah, really good, really interesting, really exciting for us, I think. We launched our first, so we went down the cradle to cradle routes. It was a challenge, I think, as Emilio alluded to. There's a cost to it, granted, but also the challenge of getting to that point was hard. And when we started off on that journey, they did think that we wouldn't be able to get the electronics part. They said it'd be too hard. There's too much within that to make it possible. We'd almost have to sort of almost ignore that part of it and get the cradle to cradle for the body and the plastics, but not the electronics. But we were the suppliers to do that, and we got to the bronze accreditation for the material health side of things. And now we can work. We understand as well the business, what it also introduces the business as well about being more sustainable, more circular in our approach to how we manufacture our products and work with our the social elements in particular. It's been really interesting. It's been really exciting. I think it's opened up a lot of conversations with people who maybe weren't aware what the circular economy was. I think it's quite a different conversation to have with people, moving it on from just talking about light levels, glare control. Absolutely, whilst still important, it just creates a different topic of discussion. And I think there's a willingness to do it. I think one of the comments that I think Mark mentioned in his presentation about how do you get people to specify and how do you get it to written specifications to enable it to be pulled through and become of value to a client, or the client to value that as part of their overall message and willingness to stick with that type of product, I think is important, and it is doable. It doesn't have to cost the earth to do it. One thing Whitecroft did as a mainstream supplier, I guess, is to make it accessible. We understand our marketplace. Part of the values within the wider sustainability is in making people be able to adopt it from the financial point of view as well, of course. It's got to be achievable and attainable for people to do that and to start on that journey. I think that's what we've tried to push through and what we're doing at Whitecroft, and not losing sight of that.
So Helen, as another major, and you were talking to us about the impacts of durability in terms of achieving sustainability. But are you also, how big a deal is that at up at the C-suite end of Trilux?
Yeah, it is a very, very big deal. That is our almost sole focus at the moment. I think there are so many aspects to this. We do want products to be reused, and we are trying very hard to implement that into first use projects. And we now do have 2 projects where we have very definitely set out that objective from the very start. The advantage those 2 projects have is we know they have a certain length of life before the building gets reused for something else. So that makes it very easy to plan your second use, because you know when it is going to be. But I think another point that's really interesting is that if you don't have that knowledge of the project, exactly as Mark said, if we have all of that knowledge, all of that data, it makes it a lot easier for us. But if you have just got a luminaire that's come out of a building, what do you do with it? The 2 easiest components within that luminaire to recycle or to reuse, the plastics and the metal, are possibly the least valuable aspects. Where we really have the value is all the copper and the very small intricate elements within the electronics, and especially the LED boards themselves. So we have to find a way to reuse those much more valuable components. As Emilio said, copper is going to run out. Gold is very, very precious, although we're managing to make LEDs now without the gold wires, but there are an awful lot out there already that have gold within them. So I think that's going to be our biggest challenge. How do we reuse the components in the electronics? As Tim said, it's complicated, but it is possible. But we need to put more value to it, because only by having a value to that will people actually do it. So we need to show how important it is, and then it's going to happen automatically. When copper becomes so expensive, it's cheaper to reuse it from an existing fitting, and we will get to that stage at some point. But it would be nice to have all the systems and the processes in place before that happens.
Now, Steve, as another major, you were talking to us about miniaturization. And you also made the observation that and wouldn't it be great, we achieve this zero carbon world where we're using PV and solar and maybe hydrogen backup, then the sustainability of manufacturing will become ever more important.
Yeah, indeed. The emphasis shifts over time. If I go and talk to our lighting designers at the office, and they're constantly trying to reduce that blunt instrument watts per meter squared in any scheme that they do, and we're always trying to incorporate controls, because I completely agree. Maybe sometimes we do need to provide blanket lighting schemes to start off with, but then what we need is the controls to make sure we can control it down to put the light where it needs to be when a tenant takes a space. Maybe that raises another question: should we really be designing speculative buildings? Ooh,
no,
that's a big question, isn't it?
Just no. No, we shouldn't. And there's models now to actually doing that, to move towards show floors, where you're actually putting in a Cat B. Here's a cellular office, here's your open plan, here's your breakout space, here's your reception, this is what we can deliver you as a building and all the rest, and you haven't put the lighting in. It's absolute disgusting travesty to put in 26 floors of Cat A only to rip it out and put it in a bin on day one. It's just, we just need to stop that now.
Yeah, absolutely agree. In terms of reducing the materials use, I think Helen mentioned there sort of recycling, but one of the major things we've got is light. You could argue that as lighting manufacturers, we're producing light fittings that are lasting too long almost, because we know, because of some of the things that was mentioned there, like fashion and similar, those light fittings will be changed after 12, 15, 17 years, when there's still perhaps tens of thousands of hours of light left in those fittings. As I said on one of the previous presentations, I don't know what the answers are. Maybe it's Ricolite, maybe it's Lumicon, maybe it's specialized contractors or similar. But one of the most valuable resources is the light left in the luminaires before we think about getting the copper and the steel and the aluminium out of those products. But I think, sorry, coming back to your question, Bob, I think tiny light fittings seems to be, we've got a tiny light source in LEDs. Tiny light fittings seem to be a pretty good idea in my book. There are some challenges. Glare can be a challenge. Getting the light right control, the correct light control from these luminaires is potentially fairly difficult to do. But I think we've got the skills, and a light fitting that is more in scale with the current light sources that we have seems like a good idea.
Right.
Sorry, can I just come back on, Bob? Can I just come back on one of Steve's points about the fact that people want to change the style of the products if they're lasting too long? I think in some applications, yes, I agree. Commercial lighting probably be an example where people want to change the style. But the reality is, in a school, if they've got a 600 by 600 ceiling now, they're going to have a 600 by 600 ceiling in 30 years. If it's a healthcare job, they're going to have the same type of ceiling. Industrial is going to have high bay products. So I think, whilst we do say, are they lasting too long? I think it depends on the application, the space that you're considering lighting, and enabling products that will still be a 600 by 600 in 15, 20 years to be upgraded, to be reused, to be repurposed, to be able to benefit new control systems, new energy lighting solutions, is okay, and they will also have a value going forward. And I think it's important we don't forget that a lot of applications will be the same for the life of the building, not just the usual route of it's going to last 8 years and be binned and start again.
Yeah, Mark pointed this out to a discussion in me a while ago when so few of the lights specified in the world, in Europe or whatever region you work in, are actually specified by lighting designers, and so many are specified by engineers, or just the architect. And we are just in danger sometimes of being a little bit too focused on our narrow field, which, when actually the volume of lights that represents might not be the solution that we have for that might not be the same as the solution for the broader.
The conversation we were having, Amelia, wasn't it? Was there was a temptation to become, the highest quality of design and the highest quality of engineering and the highest quality of manufacturing is the solution. It won't be, because that will only represent at best 10% of the market, and the other 90% won't do that. So we need, I think, to challenge ourselves about what happens to the non-excellent engineered. And we had a conversation about the light bulb, and the reason we moved only 13 years ago from tungsten halogen to LED and fluorescent to LED was because there's a climate emergency, and that engineering solution really has made a massive contribution to reducing lighting carbon. But it's created a materials problem, and because what we used to have was glass and a nail inside of it when you ran, which got hot and gave light. That's really easy to recycle. You smash it up, put the glass in one place and the metal in the other, job done. It was, really recyclable. LED light luminaire fixture with advanced optics and glare control is really hard. But if we get to a situation where we've got a decarbonised grid, actually, maybe we need to rethink about some of the technological advances we've made, because they may be presenting solutions that are insolvable. And one of the things that was useful about GLS and fluorescent was that for the lower end of the market, the lower 75%, 80% of the market, it was relatively easy to recycle. Anybody
who's been listening to this LightBytes series will know it wouldn't be LightBytes without a question from Kavan Shaw. I'm going to address this one to Mark Riddler. How do we make a value proposition for the remove, refurb, reuse of the existing installed body of lighting equipment? Particularly, how can we sell this to the developer or first user of a new building?
I don't know, Kevin, to be honest, but I think we need to develop the equivalent of a second-hand car market. And that market works because there is value in what they sell, and there's more value in selling a car with 50,000 miles on the clock than there is putting it in the ground or recycling it or scrapping it essentially. So one of the tests I have with my clients is at the beginning of the project, and what I'm briefing is saying, would you as a client for this project, would you consider, if it was available, if it was safe and viable, would you consider using second-hand equipment, either refurbished from a manufacturer or some elsewhere in your estate? And if the answer to that question is maybe, then we've games on and we can start having that conversation. If there is no, absolutely not, I'm just going to have the brand new stuff, then that has absolutely no chance of being a circular economy project. What I'm finding is that most of my clients are going, maybe. So that I think is hopeful, because actually it's not. I think if we, as an industry, somehow we find a way of capturing that value, then there is a market there who will buy it. And I'm for instance, I'm thinking as well, institutional clients like the NHS, for instance. If you could provide them with a supply of good quality fittings that were cheaper because they were second-hand, but with a defined life, they'd go for it.
Well, a thought there is, if you think of the very high-profile failure of some major bricks and mortar retail stores last year, they had some very high-quality, very effective track and spots in many of those stores. Yet we're talking about rebuilding the high street. It does seem a shame that those stores, the kit's likely to be ripped out, thrown in the skip, whereas they could be used to better light people in secondary, tertiary locations, high streets across the country.
Yeah, for sure.
Helen.
I'd like to come back on Mark's point about Cat A fit outs, because I think this probably is the biggest scandal of our industry, and we could make a difference if we can address that. And I spoke to Lansec, and they were saying the problem with not doing the Cat A fit out is that the tenant wants to move in quickly, and to do the full fit out to their spec is going to take a while, and they're not going to be able to move in that quickly. So they were looking at a sort of a modular system where they could have, I don't know, a 3 meter by 3 meter ceiling panel, which has in various options for air conditioning, lighting, all of your data collection points, possibly even sprinklers. So if we had something like a modular system, our light fittings then have to be modular to go into that ceiling module, so that you can adapt that module, whether it's going in a meeting room, an open plan area, or a relaxation area. It might want wall washing, it might want task lighting. So if we could have our luminaires much more modular, and I loved your slide where you had those circular, they weren't even downlights, those circular luminaires, but based on track, that gives us the option to put stuff in quickly, if you've got all of your first fix electrics and everything else in there, if you can then just add the light fittings at the last minute, means it will be much quicker for the tenant to move into the space, and they can have the type of space that they really want. So I think we've got to start thinking not just about modularity with building the luminaire, but modularity with how we fix the luminaire within the space. And I think the problem is there are so many choices. It could be track, it could be magnetic, it could be all sorts of things. It could be going into a modular collaboration with a ceiling manufacturer. Somehow we've got to get the whole of the industry thinking about different options, and then how we can provide those options to them. And I wondered if you'd thought about that Cat A problem just that little step further.
Well, we tend to, one of the slides I presented was that 8th section with the lighting toolkit below, and that's essentially what you've just been talking about. I mean, that was based around track, U-track, and that has the advantage of the client can go and buy another fitting with a standard modular fitting. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start. That's where we're starting.
Mm.
I think just to come back on Kevin's comment regarding the change, I think there may be an element of societal change. I think people are willing to think beyond maybe what they've done previously, and that might help to generate that incentive for secondhand, as Mark says. Are you willing to try it or are you not? I think when you do that might encourage those conversations, and maybe 5-10 years ago people wouldn't even considered it. Maybe they are now, because the values of that business and the wider impact that they need to have or need to show in that business themselves to be able to drive that through. And that could be something that pushes us or forces us, that's the wrong word, but encourages the reuse of products or the second-hand opportunity either today, or having a product today that enables the opportunity to regenerate, refresh it themselves, or to be able to sell it as a second-hand product or put it into a market with a wider environmental impact that their own footprint going forward could be an interesting change.
And then in asking that question, Mark, you need the knowledge that you've got some partners within the supply chain who are sort of circular ready, if you like. There was a while back when TVs were HD ready and people didn't really know when they were going to be HD or what that meant. But what we're trying to do is build a pool of people that have an interest, that are willing to, Helen, I know the example you used of your project where you remanufactured fittings, they weren't originally Trilux fixtures, and that shows a commitment, and it shows that a willingness to overcome the issue of warranty and the issue of ownership, that is important for the project to take place. And it's just knowing that if you have an OEM, a driver, supplier, manufacturer, a contractor and a client, and they all have this willingness, then you can get the perfect storm, and that's what we're trying to build through awareness, really.
Right, stay with us, Emilio, because I'm going to ask you the next question. This is from Patrick Redmond. If the lighting industry is to work on some sort of level playing field, we need all actors to engage in the aims discussed. It appears to me that we need government or EU level tariffs on products that don't meet the various requirements discussed. Are there any such intentions being flagged up by the powers that be? I'm not going to mention Brexit.
Yes, I mean, there's a new European standard being brought out on the maintainability and serviceability of products, and how they're labelled and how they're how they're brought to market. And it's going to make life difficult for a lot of manufacturers whose products don't clearly sit into one category or another. And there's going to have to be some decisions made on that front, but at least that enables the discussion to take place. So yeah, there was a tariff yesterday that we circulated on packaging, on making sure that business owners who provide products to the market, the government's got a questionnaire out to see whether the business owner should be responsible for the removal or the recycling of the packaging, and they're trying to understand what the focus should be by putting that out to the market for comment. So we need to engage as a community. There's questions being asked, and we need to we need to respond to those, and it's no good to just complain once they become a law, once that's passed in a couple of years' time, because we weren't paying attention, and that's, we're trying to make that digestible.
And I think the GLA are engaged in those bodies through the efforts of certain individuals. So we're trying to hook up in that land as well.
Is that the Eco Design Directive you're referring to there, Amelia?
Thank you, Helen. Yes.
It's a bit of a blunt instrument, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think, to sort of go back to Mark's comment, less than perfect action now is better than no action. And it's not to say that that's not going to have negative impacts on businesses operating the way they are now. The thing with the circular economy is everything that we've spoken about, with having, Steve mentioned, maybe there's specialist contractors to take products out of buildings, and that's jobs, that's work, and that's cost to someone, to the client or to the developer. But it takes, bottom line away from people that are, from manufacture of new products, and it's a bit of a harsh reality. But there's countless examples of organisations that have failed to adapt, and there's ones who have diversified and survived. And I always looked at, BT and failing to really get on the bandwagon with mobile technology. They were putting internet in phone boxes, and they weren't really buying into the, they thought they were too big to fail, and weren't really buying into the, the way that the market was headed. And Blockbuster did it with Netflix, and you see examples of this all the time. So the change will happen, and you can diversify and change the shape of how you operate, and designers are going to be affected as well. Like we went from just specifying one of 20 different light sources in 2000, or between 2000 and 2005, and then from there onwards I've had to be an electronics expert. And now I have to learn and read around the subject of circularity and sustainability. I'm reading net carbon zero goals from architects and companies like Levitt Bernstein, trying to work out, or Savills, trying to work out what their goals are for their portfolios, because that's going to trickle down into what we do. And we can't just engineer our way out of the problem in front of us. We need to look at the bigger picture and read around the topic.
I've got a couple of questions from Guy Kornetsky. One of them is particularly on the point and quite tough. We know manufacturers, and this is related to what Emilio's just been saying, we know manufacturers should aim to sell fewer new fittings. So how are they going to make money? Are alternative routes to earning profitable, and to convince manufacturers realistically move away from pushing new products? That's a hot potato. Who wants to grab that one?
Well, I will, because I think there's a really good point here. We would much rather, on the back of all of this, that we start improving light quality, so that we are selling better CRI products. We're making sure that they really are designed for their use. And actually, we would rather sell fewer of the high quality products than a whole truckload of the poorer quality products, and get everybody's lit environment up to a higher standard. So if you can afford to zone your lighting exactly like Mark showed, putting the lighting on the task and not the rest of the room, therefore specifying fewer light fittings, but actually specifying better quality light fittings, I think we all benefit. So
I agree. I think including, they're likely to become a bit more sophisticated because of the controls required, and the fact that, we've mentioned on a number of occasions the data that we can harvest and the potential power that can give us. So I think there are business models, but I think one important thing is that, it was mentioned in the presentation there, it always goes to the lowest bidder, and we do have value engineering, and we do have equal and approved, and these things fight against manufacturers that are trying to do the very best in terms of light quality, product quality, longevity, and sustainable and circular economy issues. So, you know, I don't think we can have it always. I think that there also needs to be, if there's a lot of investment made into a good product with a, you know, a good application story and all the rest of it, then it gets difficult when that falls at the last hurdle, which is value engineering and similar.
Tim,
I think for me,
there's some manufacturers
so I think,
like. Oh, sorry, Bob.
no,
Go on, Tim. Oh, sorry, Emilio.
no, I think for me, it's about relationships. I think, you know, putting a product into the market and forgetting about it and saying it's going to last you 20 years, we've done our bit, I think is, you know, you got a 5-year warranty, whatever it might be. I think it goes beyond that. I think the relationships you create with the clients, with the supply chain, with the business, you know, using the likes of smart controls, using maintenance contracts, maybe, you know, so not lighting as a service in the model where we own the light fitting, but we create the relationship from a maintenance point of view. So we support the emergency testing, we support the, you know, preemptive maintenance. We understand the systems, how they're performing, using smart controls for us to get the data and analytics, so we can stop things going wrong when they happen. We can provide that annual contract, whatever it may be. We can provide proactive regeneration, so we know if the luminaire is going to be 15-20% more efficient at a point. We can understand the payback for the client. We can go to them and say, if you invest in this now, we can upgrade it for you. The payback will be X. Here's the evidence. Here's what you've been using. Can you use the ads for less or more? We can start to say, you know, you're using the fittings too much in that space. I think someone yesterday in the meeting I was in, like a smart meter almost. We all have smart meters. Okay, mine's been off for the last few months because of having a baby, because there's too much electricity. But the point is, you know, you almost do that goal, don't you? Like you Google when you walk to somewhere, you know, where you go somewhere, you try and beat the time, don't you? Because that's your target, that's your aim, isn't it? Can we start supporting people to how you can become more energy efficient with that data and information to create those relationships? I think for me, that's where things may change. Doesn't remove the need of the designers to deliver the right solutions in the first place, of course not. But once it's there, once they've got it, how do we as manufacturers support it in its operation and make sure it does the most it can do?
Emilio, you had a point.
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Tim. I think if you can gamify it somehow and make it more engaging for facilities managers or end users to have that relationship, you know, presumably, I don't know how it works with manufacturers, but maybe you've got a catalogue of installations you completed 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the orders that you provided, that you can contact those people, and you don't need to sell new products. You could, you know, talk about a refurbishment program or a remanufacture program for a large fit out or data center, warehouse, anything. You know, there's lots of opportunities for things like that, which would, you know, not just require you to wait for an order from a contractor for a new installation. And that's a different, like you say, it's a different relationship that isn't currently happening. And some of these relationships will be effective and others might not go anywhere, but unless the conversations happen, you know, it won't make sense. In terms of profitability, Lucent have brought remanufactured products, downlights, back to market, and they make the same margin as they do on a new product. It's just a totally different flow of works. But that's going to hit other manufacturers differently. So, you know, somebody who produces a linear product won't see that efficiency necessarily, or an integrated product. So different parts of the market are going to suffer and prosper differently. But, you know, that's part of the process, unfortunately.
And I think also part of the problem there is that we don't actually put a value on the environment. So as Dr. Mark Carney said, you know, Amazon, the company, is one of the most valuable businesses in the world. The Amazon doesn't appear on any balance sheet. And so we have this issue of that we're constantly talking about, you know, selling light fittings, but we're not looking at the sustainability cost if we sell too many or don't consider where they're going to come from. Sorry, Steve.
It just occurred to me, you know, I've seen and been involved with more than one company actually, sort of, you know, the whole refurbishment gear tray market. So there's an element that there's some of this work taking place anyway, where you've got lots of fluorescent fittings in maybe a London office building, and then they're refurbished to, you know, LED gear trays, and there's a an uplift in efficacy and efficiency of the scheme. And so I think there's work like this taking place at the moment. It's probably a little bit scattered and a little bit not as visible. It's a day-to-day project work. But I don't know, maybe there's an element that we just need to shout a bit more about what's happening and replicate it.
I agree. I mean, we have a continuous line trunking product that was very popular when it was T5, and it's evolved over the last few years to be a very efficient LED product, and now that still fits on the same trunking system. So you can upgrade your original product just by putting this new LED module on the front of it. And we do, exactly as you said, Emilio, go through past customers and go to them and say, you bought this from us 10 years ago, it would definitely be worth you upgrading, and show them the payback just by changing the module. So we do actually do that. But as you say, Steve, that's our day-to-day work back of house, really.
So that's being you have portions of your facilities which are allocated for that type of work. And I suppose with that, you've got some examples of the financial balance sheet for that to achieve that. And then it's a question of investing in the expansion of that concept to other products, or when people say, well, we can't do it with this product, asking why and what could be changed in order so that it could be done, and then perhaps bringing in a designer or a client into the equation, saying, look, maybe we should discontinue this for this reason and move down this route, and see what the feedback is. And it's just having those discussions.
Now,
yeah,
I'm really sorry, because we're reaching the end of our time. So some people are going to have to leave our presentation. So I'm going to have one more question. Those of you who have to now leave at 12:30, thank you very, very much for joining us. Any unanswered questions we're going to be answering afterwards. And of course, a reminder that you will be sending links to rewatching these sessions as they have been recorded. So another nitty-gritty final question to the team, and this is from Michael Mann. How can refurbishing technology, my apologies, sorry, that's starting. He had two questions. Right, embedding usage data into luminaires that can be recovered at the end of use is poor value, says Michael. We need luminaires to tell us how many hours they are doing in real time and the level of output, and that can also be analyzed in real time to help users optimize energy use.
Yeah, I think that comes back to the comment I said before about supporting the relationship in the monitoring using controls, and getting greater analytics. I think I agree with that comment.
The only thing I would say is that you need the data inside the luminaire, because as soon as you take the luminaire out of the control environment, it loses all that data, it loses all its value. So you need the equivalent of chipping your pet dog in your luminaire, and the tech's already there. And it's not, I think it's a firmware issue, not even a hardware issue.
There's an element of hardware, Mark, because whilst we monitor driver, like a Dai driver has a mileometer in it, the LED boards traditionally don't. So once you create that first driver replacement, because the drivers think it's going to fail first, you lose then the performance of the LEDs. I think there's something about being able to monitor that part separately as well as the driver to be able to then report the data.
Yeah. Is there not also a requirement to have access to photometry? Mark, you came up with you said humorous second-hand car dealership. At least if you go around and read what it says on the boot, it says it's 1.2 or a 1.6. You've got an idea of what it does.
Yeah, again, I don't think that's necessarily a technically difficult thing, because if you barcoded or that actually took you to a database that was cloud-based, then you would be able to access the full product specification downstream.
Steve?
I just immediately thought of car clocking then, where you had a car that had 50,000 miles when it had done 100,000. I don't know why.
But borrowing other people's photometry is not unknown as well.
I think it just goes to show why data is the world's most valuable resource, because the more information you've got, whether it's built in a product, whether it's been extracted, whether it's in use or whatever, just helps us make decisions. So you know, I think it's critical to help us in this going forward, getting as much information about use, light level, and how hard a life a luminaire has had, etc. I don't know the technicalities of how we extract it, but we have to.
Helen?
I agree. I think, you know, we already can collect such a lot of data about an installation and how that product is used in that installation. And then it would be good to be able to continue that information with the product if it goes to another project. What I hadn't thought about was the breakdown between the control gear and the LED board itself. And if you have to try and record data for both of those individual components, you're really getting to a high level of complexity there, but maybe that's what we have to do.
And Emilio,
I think it's worth saying we don't expect the performance of a second-hand car necessarily to be as good as a brand new car. Of course, our expectation changes as the mileage increases and things begin to wear out. But generally speaking, I don't think people would expect so much. And maybe that's the same with light fittings as well. And you know, we rather than striving for perfection, let's just get on and do it with get the information and just start to do it.
I agree, Steve, but you need to have that information. You need to have that information available, don't you? Whether it has done 10,000 hours or 70,000 hours or 10,000 miles, 70,000 miles, you need to know what that information is. I agree, you don't have to be 110 rather than 120 lumens, what might be good enough, but you still need to know at that point what it's doing. Otherwise, you can't make that informed judgment on what you're buying. So I still think you need to get more data, even if it's not as good as a new product.
we are over time, so Emilio, you started today's presentation, so I'm going to let you have the last words. Again, anybody who hasn't had their questions answered, we will be coming back to you, and please catch up with these as recordings. Thank you very much for joining us. Emilio, your last words.
No, thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I would say data is probably, the most valuable resource we have after the planet or the environment. So, thanks for listening in, and thanks for your time, everyone.
So with that, everybody who's been joining us, enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.